Welcome to From Fear to Fighting Back, Lambda Legal's online program celebrating the leaders of the fight for LGBTQ legal equality in America. Today's guest is Professor Muneer Ahmad, the Sol Goldman Clinical Professor of Law and Director of the Jerome N. Frank Legal Services Organization at Yale Law School. He co-teaches in the Worker and Immigrant Rights Advocacy Clinic, WIRAC, where he and his students represent individuals, groups, and organizations in matters related to immigration, immigrant rights, and labor, and intersections among them. A graduate of both Harvard College and Harvard Law School, Professor Ahmad isn't afraid to take on challenging cases. He has represented inmates at Guantanamo Bay and won the injunction striking down the initial Muslim ban promulgated by the Trump administration within a week of their taking office in January 2017. I've known Professor Muneer Ahmad for 34 years, since he was just Muneer, my high school student at the Moses Brown School in Providence, Rhode Island. I knew then that this brilliant young man was destined for greatness, and I must say, Muneer, you have not disappointed me. It is a pleasure to have you on the program, and I am so grateful to spend this time with you. Welcome, Professor Muneer Ahmad.
Thanks, Kevin. It's really a thrill to be with you.
Well, as I mentioned, one of your many claims to fame is that you attained the first nationwide injunction against the so-called Muslim ban, which the Trump administration proposed within a week of taking office in January 2017. Tell us about how you did that and what the future holds for this case.
We pretty quickly assembled a team of our students, a few of us on the faculty, a team of lawyers from the National Immigration Law Center and from the ACLU. And as the chaos was unfolding at airports, people, the Muslim ban was kind of put in place before it was even announced. And so people were implementing it without even having clear guidance on what they were supposed to be doing. We were working literally through the night. We started working around 10 o'clock in the evening, worked through the night, and wrote a complaint and a motion for a class action, and filed it at roughly 5:30 the next morning. That day, Saturday, January 28th, people will remember the visuals of these spontaneous gatherings at the airports, where thousands and thousands of people at airports across the country, JFK, O'Hare, Logan, SFO, LAX, small airports like the Hartford airport near me, tiny airports that weren't even international airports, were transformed into these sites of protest. We got in front of a judge around 7 o'clock on a Saturday night. We packed the courtroom with many protesters who had been at JFK, were redirected to Cadman Plaza in Brooklyn. And there was this extraordinary Saturday night hearing. And it was a short hearing at which the government struggled to articulate what the basis was for its own policy. And the judge in that case very quickly thereafter issued a nationwide injunction that put a stop to that first Muslim ban. It was roughly 18 hours after we had started working on it that we got this nationwide injunction.
Now, the Supreme Court ultimately allowed the ban once it was relabeled a travel ban rather than a Muslim ban. What does the future hold for this policy and for the people that it prevents from coming to our country?
If that was all that had happened, that would be bad enough. But actually what's happened is that there's been, I would say, at least two more forms of Muslim bans that have been layered on. One, which sometimes is referred to as Muslim Ban 4.0, places very strict restrictions on refugee admissions and processing from non-Muslim countries, including countries like Syria or Yemen or the Sudan, from which there's such humanitarian crisis and so many refugees. So that's the kind of Muslim Ban 4.0. And then there's something that is sometimes referred to as a backdoor Muslim ban, and that is that there's not a formal policy that's restricting people from coming from Muslim countries, but in essentially every other Muslim country in the world, even if it's not on one of these lists, the administration has been slow walking visa processing and the granting of visas so that it's become incredibly difficult to come to the United States from a Muslim country. So the effect is pretty profound. It's pretty lasting. And in some ways, the Muslim ban has served as a template for how the administration has proceeded, which is to do things in an iterative fashion. The first salvo is an incredible overreach. It prompts extraordinary kind of protest in response. The courts quickly reject the effort of the administration to do what it's trying to do. And then the administration retrenches. And they retrench once or twice, and eventually the courts let them get away with it. We've seen that happen with DACA. We've seen that happen with a number of other immigration policies. And so at the end of the day, one of my messages to my students is we will fight in the courts, but we have to remember the courts will not save us. Right now, for example, with the Muslim ban, the solution to the Muslim ban is not going to be the courts. The solution to the Muslim ban is going to be the election, and it's going to be politics, and it's going to be a change in the decisions that we make with regard to our elected officials, and not crafting the perfect persuasive argument for a judge to look at the issue again.
I'm glad you brought up the impact of the ban on LGBT people. Often the images we get are justifiably painful images of the separation of husbands and wives, of heterosexual couples from their children. But what about the impact of the Muslim ban on LGBT people? Can you talk a little bit about how LGBT people are hurt by this ban?
Yeah, so the impact, I think, again, is kind of on all three of these levels: the Muslim ban 3.0, 4.0, and the backdoor ban. Because what it means is that there are LGBT people from the countries that are subject to Muslim ban 3.0 who are essentially indefinitely barred from entering the country. There's an extraordinary number of LGBT refugees and asylum seekers who are not able to gain protection from persecution or from torture, which we know is a massive problem in many parts of the world, including the Muslim world. And so that is an extraordinary problem, which we saw, in the latter years of the Obama administration. We saw that there was actually a sizable number of LGBT refugees and asylum seekers coming from Iraq, Syria, Afghanistan, a number of other countries where they were where their lives were under threat. And I don't think that it's an exaggeration to say that there are people who will die, LGBT people who will die as a result of the policies of this administration. And so the effects are really quite profound.
Well, that raises an interesting question, which is, where do you see the overlap between the experience of LGBT people and of the Muslim community? And obviously there are LGBT Muslims. I don't want to talk as if those are distinct communities where there's no overlap. But, where is the overlap in the experience of these two communities, both of which have been stigmatized by the Trump administration in this time period? And do you see opportunities for solidarity between the LGBT community and the Muslim community in America?
I do see opportunities for solidarity. I think that it takes a lot of work on both sides. But one of the things that I think has always been true, but has become abundantly clear in this administration, is that forms of exclusion, they travel together. And Islamophobia and white supremacy and homophobia are actually all aspects of the same kind of expression of power. They all do the same work of consolidating a particular identity that is that its proponents claim is the only true American identity, and they also serve as a basis to consolidate power. And so one of the things that I draw some comfort in is the way in which in this moment you have different communities of color, for example, that are expressing solidarity for one another. you have a much stronger level of solidarity between U.S. citizen communities of color and immigrants. And I think that we're also starting to see much stronger bonds across communities of color and the LGBT community. We've all been placed in the same boat, and someone's trying to sink that boat. And we are finding ways to understand our commonalities and also understand the common enemy that's trying to subordinate us all. And I think that there is a lot of opportunity for solidarity. I think we have to lift up even the small examples of it that we see and that we find to help to normalize that and to create possibilities for the future.
Now, as your former teacher, I now have a question for you as you are a teacher yourself now at Yale Law School. When our Supreme Court hands down the kind of cynical, in my opinion, decision approving the travel ban, which is so clearly a ban motivated by bigotry against Muslims, it'd be easy for young people to become cynical about the process. How do you inspire your students to continue to believe in the system and to believe they can make a difference in the face of discouraging behavior by the people with power who don't seem to be that interested sometimes in the administration of justice?
Mm-hmm. So I think that this goes back to how we understand what the role of lawyers is and what the role of the courts are. So part of what I try to teach my students is that if what we seek to do is to go out and find the perfect plaintiff with the perfect claim and bring it to the perfect court to try to get the perfect decision, we may well win that one case. We're not going to win the movement. And, laws, like everything else, is dynamic. And so the Muslim ban is a great example. We won that first round unquestionably and incredibly quickly. But that battle actually is still ongoing. And so the question, we would be naive to think that the courts are completely immune from politics. At the same time, there obviously is a space, even as politics are operating in the courts, there are other forces that are at work. And we as lawyers have an opportunity to try to navigate those very complex systems. But I think that the way to do it is to always recognize that courts and court strategy are an important but limited piece of a larger campaign for social change. And what that means practically is for us as lawyers to align ourselves with movement actors, with organizers, with people who are engaging in social change in ways that intersect with but are not entirely dependent upon court strategy. I think, so in that sense, what I hope that we're doing, what we're modeling in our work in our clinic and that our students are taking away is how to be lawyers for movements and to think about what our comparative advantages are, to put those in service of the movement, but not to ever think that what we do is going to take care of all the movement's goals. I sometimes think, we're like the Masons for the movement. There's a lot of craft that's involved. You're building something that's really important, which sometimes is the road on which people are going to march. We repair things when they get destroyed. But we're not the architects. We are not the movement. We are a part of it. But we also have to recognize that we're not even the head of it. If anything, we're underneath the feet of the movement. And I want my students to understand that that is a glorious, humble, and really wonderful place to be.
I'd actually like to close with a couple personal questions, if I may. You identify as both gay and Muslim. How have these and other identities you hold informed your approach to human and civil rights and the work that you do?
From a very young age, growing up as the son of Pakistani immigrants in suburban Rhode Island, I had an appreciation of my own sense of difference. And I think that made me aware of just how difference operates in our society. When I came to understand that I was gay, that added an additional dimension of understanding about difference, about exclusion, and inclusion. And I think that in many ways, when I think about why civil rights and human rights are core to not just my political commitments, but how I aspire to spend practically every day of my life, I think it's because I have some memory of what even small experiences of exclusion were at a very young age. And I also have had I've been very fortunate to experience the transformation that comes with those sources of exclusion being accepted or celebrated. And I think about that a lot now that I'm a parent.
Well, that is actually my final question. You and your partner are the parents of two absolutely adorable kids who I know for a fact are adorable because they've been to my home. And I'm curious how that identity shapes your view of the world and how becoming a parent has affected your view of the world and your work.
I now try to look at the world through their eyes, or imagine what the world is going to be like for them. I'm deeply, deeply worried. And I'm worried about everything from climate change to fascism to racism, to the question of whether our family and our family structure is going to be denigrated by the federal government or respected by the federal government. And I didn't think I was going to have those worries, at least the worry about our family structure 5 years ago. I'm more worried about that now than I ever have been. But I also am kind of more convinced than ever about the importance of the work and about working in solidarity and in building a vision that, what Dr. King called the beloved community is still there to be built. And I hope that one of the things that my kids will learn is about what we as a family have tried to do to build that and build it for ourselves, but to build it for others as well. And that they will kind of soak up some of that in terms of values and some of it in terms of skills, and that they'll find new and creative ways to carry that work forward.
Well, Professor Muneer Ahmad, your kids are lucky to have you as a father. Your students are lucky to have you as a teacher. It's been a pleasure talking with you this morning, and thank you for joining us on From Fear to Fighting Back.
Thanks so much for having me, Kevin. It's just a deep, deep pleasure to be in conversation with you and to have been in conversation with you for so many years.